The Serengeti has rules that don't bend. Everyone who works there knows this. Dr. James Sullivan had known it for 18 years. He was a wildlife veterinarian, not a hero. His job was to treat animals when the reserve allowed it, document when it didn't, and never, ever interfere with nature's course unless human activity caused the injury. But on a Tuesday morning in late August, James broke that rule, and a lioness made sure he understood exactly what that cost. He found her near the dried riverbed, collapsed in the shade of a fever tree. A wire snare was buried deep in her right hind leg, cutting through muscle down to bone. Infection had turned the wound black. Gangrene was setting in. She was dying. James approached slowly, medical kit in hand, already calculating the sedative dose. The lioness lifted her head and growled. Not at him, past him. James turned and saw what she was protecting. 3 cubs, maybe 8 weeks old, hidden in the tall grass 10 meters behind her. The lioness was dying, but she refused to let anyone near her babies. James knelt 20 feet away, setting down his kit. "I know," he said quietly. "I know what you're thinking." The lioness's eyes never left him. Her breathing was labored, each exhale a visible effort. "You think if you let me close enough to help you, I'll take them. You think I'm a threat." The cubs mewed softly from the grass, hungry, confused, too young to understand their mother was dying. James had seen this before. Maternal aggression in wounded animals, the final, desperate act of protection when a mother knows she's failing. Protocol was clear. Document, report, leave. Nature would take its course. The cubs would die without their mother. But interference with wild lion behavior was prohibited unless the injury was human-caused. Except this injury was human-caused. That snare had been set by poachers, which meant James had authority to intervene, but only if the animal allowed it. The lioness growled again, louder this time, a warning. James didn't move. "I'm not here for them," he said. "I'm here for you." The lioness tried to stand. Her front legs lifted her chest off the ground, but the injured hind leg collapsed immediately. She fell with a grunt of pain that made James's chest tighten. The cubs cried out. The lioness turned her head toward them, made a soft chuffing sound. Comfort, reassurance. "I'm still here." But she wasn't. Not for much longer. James pulled out his radio. "Base, this is Sullivan. I have a critical situation at grid reference 742. Adult female, snare injury, severe infection. 3 dependent cubs present. Requesting authorization for emergency intervention." The response came after 10 seconds of static. "Sullivan, what's the animal's condition?" "Septic shock. Maybe 12 hours left, less if she keeps trying to move." "Is she allowing approach?" James looked at the lioness. She was watching him with eyes that held no trust, only calculation. "No." "Then you know the protocol." "The injury is poacher-caused. I have authority." "Not if she's refusing intervention. You cannot force treatment on an animal exhibiting defensive maternal behavior. Document and withdraw." James closed his eyes. Understood. He opened his eyes and looked at the lioness. She was still watching him, waiting to see what he would do. James didn't leave. He sat down, 20 feet from the dying lioness, and he waited. The sun climbed higher. The temperature reached 38 degrees Celsius. James pulled a water bottle from his pack and drank slowly, watching the lioness watch him. She hadn't moved in an hour, too weak, too close to the end. The cubs had stopped crying. Bad sign. They were shutting down. Dehydration, heat stress. James set down his water bottle and very slowly, very carefully, pulled a collapsible bowl from his medical kit. He filled it with water. The lioness tensed. James set the bowl on the ground and pushed it gently toward her with a stick. It stopped 5 feet from her muzzle. She looked at the water, looked at James, looked at her cubs. Then she lowered her head and drank. Not much, a few laps, but enough. When she lifted her head again, something in her eyes had changed. Not trust, not yet, but acknowledgement. James waited another hour. The lioness's breathing grew more labored. Her head drooped. The cubs emerged from the grass, confused and frightened, crawling toward their mother. The lioness made that chuffing sound again, but weaker now. One cub nuzzled her face. Another tried to nurse but couldn't find a position that worked with the mother lying in such an awkward angle. The third cub, the smallest, walked straight toward James. The lioness's head shot up, a warning growl, but it had no strength behind it. The cub kept walking. It stopped 3 feet from James, sat down, and looked at him with enormous amber eyes. Scared, hungry, alone. James stayed perfectly still. The cub mewed. The lioness tried to stand again, failed again, made a sound James had never heard from a lion before. Desperation. She was asking for help. Not for herself, for them. Then she looked at James, and in that moment, everything changed. Her amber eyes locked onto his with an intensity that pierced straight through him, not with aggression, not with fear, but with something far more unsettling. Recognition. She knew. She knew that the wire cutting into her leg, the infection spreading through her body, the poison killing her slowly, all of it came from humans. But she also knew something else, that James was different. He hadn't run toward her with a weapon. He hadn't tried to force his way close. He had waited. He had offered water. He had respected her space even when protocol said to leave. And now, with her strength fading and her cubs' lives hanging in the balance, she was making a calculation that would either save them all or doom them. She was choosing to trust. James felt tears burn his eyes. He'd worked with lions for 18 years. He'd treated hundreds of injuries, handled dozens of dangerous situations, but he had never, not once, felt truly seen by an animal until this moment. "If I come closer, you need to let me," James said, his voice breaking. "Do you understand?" The lioness's eyes held his for 3 more seconds. Then, slowly, deliberately, she lowered her head to the ground. Submission, permission, a gamble on the one human who had proven himself worthy. James stood and walked forward with his medical kit, his hands shaking, understanding that he was now responsible not just for saving her life, but for proving that her trust wasn't misplaced. The sedative took 7 minutes to work. James administered it from 3 feet away using a dart gun, the lioness too weak to even flinch at the impact. When her eyes finally closed, James moved quickly. He examined the snare wound under harsh sunlight, worse than he'd thought. The wire had severed the Achilles tendon. Even with surgery, she'd have a permanent limp. The infection was systemic: fever, dehydration, sepsis. He had maybe a 20% chance of saving her, but he had to try. James worked for 2 hours in the brutal heat. He cut away dead tissue, flushed the wound with liters of saline, administered broad-spectrum antibiotics directly into the muscle. The snare came out in pieces, rusted wire that had been embedded for at least a week. He stitched what he could, bandaged what he couldn't, set up an IV line for fluids. The cubs watched from the grass, silent now, understanding on some primal level that the human was helping. When James finished, he sat back, drenched in sweat, and looked at his work. The lioness was still alive, barely. Her breathing had stabilized slightly. The IV was running. The antibiotics were in her system. Now it was up to her body to fight. James checked his watch. 4 hours since he'd found her. His radio crackled. "Sullivan, status report." "I'm still here." "James, The voice belonged to Dr. Caroline Ndlovu, the reserve's chief veterinarian, his boss, his mentor. You administered treatment against protocol. The animal granted permission. That's not how the paperwork will read. Then I'll deal with the paperwork. A long pause. How's she doing? James looked at the lioness. I don't know yet. And the cubs? Dehydrated, hungry, scared. Can you get them to drink? Maybe if their mother wakes up first and tells them I'm safe. And if she doesn't wake up? James didn't answer. The lioness didn't wake up for 16 hours. James stayed the entire time. He couldn't leave. The IV needed monitoring. The wound needed checking. And the cubs needed their mother to wake up and tell them what to do. Caroline arrived at sunset with supplies. More fluids, food, a tent, backup antibiotics. She didn't say anything about protocol violations. She just set up the tent and helped James monitor vitals. At midnight, the lioness stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, confused, searching. The cubs immediately rushed to her, mewing desperately. The lioness lifted her head with enormous effort and looked at them, then at the IV line in her leg, then at James, sitting 10 feet away. For a long moment, she just stared. James stayed very still. The lioness made a soft sound. The cubs immediately settled against her belly and began to nurse. She kept her eyes on James the entire time. Not threatening, not grateful, just aware. Caroline whispered, "She knows you saved her." "She knows I could still be a threat to her cubs," James corrected. "But she made a choice to trust me. Now she's waiting to see if she was right." James returned every 6 hours over the next 4 days. Each visit followed the same ritual. He never entered her space with assumption or arrogance. He asked permission with his eyes, waited for her acknowledgement. Only then would he approach. On the 4th day, Caroline arrived with intelligence reports. "We found the poachers, James. 3 men, arrested 20 kilometers south. They weren't just setting random snares." James stopped cleaning the wound. The lioness, who now rested her head on her paws during treatments, released a soft breath, almost like a sigh. "They were hunting her specifically," Caroline continued, her voice tight. "There are rumors of a rare specimen in this region, something worth a fortune on the black market." James looked toward the bushes where the cubs were playing. That's when it happened. For the first time in 4 days, the sun hit at exactly the right angle. One of the cubs emerged from the shadows. He wasn't golden like his siblings. He was pure white, his coat gleaming like a diamond under the Serengeti sun. James's heart stopped. A white lion in the wild was a genetic miracle that occurred once in a generation, and a death sentence, worth hundreds of thousands to collectors, priceless to zoos that didn't ask questions, a trophy that poachers would kill entire prides to obtain. "She knew," James whispered, his voice breaking. "Caroline, she knew." Caroline stepped closer, staring at the white cub. "Knew what?" She wasn't refusing help because of wild instinct. James turned to look at the lioness, who was watching him with those amber eyes that had haunted him for 4 days. She was testing us. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. The lioness had allowed the poison to nearly kill her, had kept every human at a distance, had endured days of agony and fever. Not because she was too wild to accept help, but because she needed to be certain, absolutely certain, that the human who finally got close would look at her white cub and see a life to protect, not a prize to steal. "She let the poison almost win," James said quietly, tears streaming down his face, "because she needed time to find the one human who would prove himself worthy, who would wait, who would respect her decision, who would show through patience and distance that he wasn't like the others." He walked slowly to the lioness and knelt beside her. "You weren't surrendering," he said, looking into her eyes. You were choosing me." The lioness held his gaze. Then she did something James would carry with him for the rest of his life. She closed her eyes slowly, the long, deliberate blink that big cats reserve only for those they trust completely. The slow blink, the visual kiss, the ultimate sign of feline affection and safety. In that moment, James understood. The gratitude of a wild animal isn't a thank you for a life saved. It's the sacred gift of trust that most humans will never deserve. And she had chosen him to guard the rarest treasure the Serengeti had produced in a decade. 2 weeks later, the lioness was walking, limping badly, but walking. The wound was healing, the infection was gone. She'd regained 20 pounds. James had reduced his visits to once per day, then once every other day. The lioness grew more comfortable with his presence, not friendly, but no longer defensive. The cubs, meanwhile, had decided James was part of the landscape. They'd approach within 5 feet now, curious and fearless. The white cub was the boldest. He'd sit directly in front of James, staring with those pale blue eyes that would eventually turn amber, completely unafraid. James knew it was time to step back, let the family return to wild behavior. But on the 16th day, Caroline called with news that shattered everything. The poachers made bail. James stopped packing his medical kit. What? Insufficient evidence for detention. They're out, awaiting trial in 3 months. They confessed, recanted, said they were coerced. Without physical evidence linking them to this specific lioness, without witnesses to the actual crime. The snare is a common brand sold in 12 countries. We can't prove it was theirs. James closed his eyes. How long before they come back? If they're smart, they won't. But James, Caroline's voice dropped, if they know about the white cub, if they've been watching this area. She didn't need to finish. Those men had tried to kill the lioness to make her cubs orphans, easy to capture and sell. But they'd failed. The lioness had survived. The cubs were healthy. And the white cub was still here, growing stronger every day, becoming more visible, more vulnerable. If the poachers came back, they wouldn't stop at one snare. They'd bring guns. James drove out to the fever tree that night. The lioness was there, as always, with her cubs sleeping against her side. The white cub was curled between his golden siblings, his pale coat catching the moonlight. She lifted her head when she heard his vehicle, but didn't stand. James sat on the hood of his truck, 20 feet away, and spoke into the darkness. "I have a choice to make," he said, "and I think you should know about it." The lioness watched him with those amber eyes. "I can leave you here, let you heal at your own pace, let your cubs learn this territory. But the men who hurt you are free. They know about him." James gestured to the white cub. "They'll come back, maybe not tomorrow, but they will come." One of the golden cubs stirred, stretched, then settled again. "Or I can move you, take you somewhere safer, farther from human access, where no one knows what you're protecting. But the journey might kill you. The stress, the sedation, the displacement. Your body isn't fully healed. You might not survive the transport." The lioness's ears twitched. "I don't know what the right choice is," admitted James, his voice breaking. "I don't know if I should play it safe and risk leaving you vulnerable, or gamble everything on a move that could cost you your life." He paused, tears streaming down his face. "But 4 weeks ago, you made a choice. You chose to trust me with the most precious thing in your world. You tested me, you waited, you made sure I was worthy." The white cub lifted his head, yawned, and looked directly at James with those pale eyes. "So now I'm asking you," whispered James. "What do you want me to do?" The lioness looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood up, slowly, painfully, but with absolute purpose. She walked 3 steps towards James's truck, stopped, turned her head to look back at the fever tree, at the territory she'd held for 5 years, the hunting grounds she knew by heart, the waterhole where her cubs had learned to drink. Then she looked forward, toward the road, toward the unknown. And she sat down, facing away from everything she knew, ready to leave, choosing safety over familiarity, choosing her cub's future over her own comfort, choosing, once again, to trust James. James climbed off the truck, his whole body shaking. Okay, I'll get you somewhere safe. I promise. The lioness looked at him one more time. Then she returned to her cubs, gathered them close, and waited for morning. The relocation took 4 days to organize. Caroline pulled strings with a reserve 200 kilometers north, remote, heavily patrolled, no poaching incidents in 3 years. They sedated the lioness carefully at dawn, loading her and the cubs into a specialized transport crate with ventilation, monitoring equipment, and padding. James rode in the back with them the entire 6-hour journey, checking vitals every 20 minutes. The lioness woke once during transport, groggy, confused, her eyes wild with panic. But when she saw James sitting beside the crate, his hand pressed against the mesh, she settled. The white cub mewed. James spoke softly, continuously, letting her hear his voice. Trust held. They released her at dawn in a permanent water, dense cover, and abundant prey. The lioness stumbled out of the crate first, her limbs still visible, her body tense. The 3 cubs tumbled after her, the white one staying close to his mother's side. She looked around, testing the air, assessing this new world. Then she turned and looked at James. He stayed by the truck, giving her space, his heart breaking because he knew this was goodbye. The lioness took 2 steps toward him. James held his breath. She stopped 5 feet away. They looked at each other one final time. All the hours of waiting, all the treatments, all the trust built in silence, all the choices made, compressed into one moment. "You're safe here," James whispered, his voice breaking. "All of you, especially him." The lioness held his gaze. Then she did it again, the slow blink, the visual kiss, the gift only given to those who've earned it. And James understood. She wasn't thanking him for saving her life. She was thanking him for seeing her white cub and choosing protection over profit, for understanding that some treasures aren't meant to be owned, for proving that her trust, her impossible, calculated, desperate trust, had been placed in the right hands. The lioness turned, gathered her cubs with a soft chuff, and walked into the tall grass of her new territory. The white cub looked back once, his pale coat catching the sunrise. Then he followed his mother into the wild. James stood there long after they disappeared, tears streaming down his face, his hand still pressed against the empty crate. Caroline stood beside him in silence. Finally, she spoke. "You saved 4 lives, James." "No," James said quietly. "She saved them. I just proved I was worthy of helping." 6 months later, a ranger from the Northern Reserve sent James a photograph. 4 lions drinking at a waterhole, a limping female with a distinctive scar on her right hind leg, 2 golden adolescent cubs, healthy and strong, and 1 white subadult, his coat gleaming like snow against the African sun, his pale blue eyes turned amber now, watching the camera with the confidence of a lion who'd never learned to fear humans because his mother had chosen the right one to trust. Thriving. James pinned the photo above his desk, next to the piece of wire snare he'd kept, a reminder. Not all bonds are built on blind trust. Some are built on negotiation, on patience, on tests we don't even know we're taking, on a mother's calculation that her life mattered less than choosing the right human to guard her miracle. The lioness had refused help not because she didn't need it, but because she needed to know that accepting it wouldn't cost her everything. And when James proved, through water offered, space respected, time given, that he understood what was truly at stake, she chose to trust. Not immediately, not blindly, but with the full weight of her intelligence behind it. And that choice saved not just her life, but a white lion who had no idea how close he'd come to never seeing adulthood. Some debts are paid in silence, some trust is earned in waiting, and some mothers know things we'll spend lifetimes trying to understand. If this story reminded you that intelligence doesn't require language, that trust is earned through respect, not force, that some choices are tests we don't even know we're taking, subscribe to our channel. We share stories like this every week, where patience wins, where mothers protect what they love with calculations that pierce our souls, and where the wild teaches us what it means to truly be worthy. See you in the next one.